The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Coyote Creek as Zachariah Winters rode into town, his weathered face hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, a man with nothing to lose and everything to hide. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new beginning had drawn many to this remote corner of the Arizona territory, including one Zara Sutton, whose arrival 6 months prior had stirred more gossip than a twister in a churchyard. The small frontier town buzzed with whispers about the mysterious woman who kept her face concealed beneath elegant veils and rarely ventured beyond the confines of her modest home at the edge of town. Some said she was running from the law, others claimed she was hiding from a violent husband. The truth, as it often is, was far more complicated and painful than the townsfolk could imagine. Dust swirled around Zachariah's boots as he dismounted in front of the Watering Hole Saloon, his trusted Mustang, Thunder, nickering softly as he secured the reins to the hitching post. The journey had been long and arduous, his body aching from weeks in the saddle, but he had made it to Coyote Creek, following rumors and whispered tales of a doctor who could treat wounds that went beyond the physical. New in town. The bartender, a burly man with a graying beard, asked as Zachariah approached the bar, his spurs jingling with each step. "Just passing through," Zachariah replied, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Looking for work and a place to rest my head." The bartender nodded, pouring a generous measure of whiskey. "Well, you're in luck. Old man Wilson's been looking for help at his ranch just outside town, pays fair and provides a bunk." Zachariah nodded his thanks, downing the amber liquid in one swift motion, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the memories that haunted him. He had been a Texas Ranger once, respected and feared in equal measure until the fateful night that had changed everything. As he turned to leave, the saloon doors swung open and a hush fell over the room. A woman stood in the doorway, her slender figure draped in a modest blue dress, her face obscured by a delicate lace veil that cascaded from the brim of her bonnet. Even with her features hidden, there was something about her that commanded attention, a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "Miss Sutton," the bartender acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Your usual order is ready." Zachariah watched as she approached the bar, keeping her distance from the other patrons who regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. There was a story there, one that intrigued him more than he cared to admit. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," she replied, her voice soft yet clear, a hint of an Eastern accent coloring her words. "And the medicine, Doc Hayes sent it over this morning, it's all there." She nodded, reaching for the package the bartender had placed on the counter, but in her haste, her gloved hand knocked over an empty glass. The sound of shattering glass seemed to startle her, and she stepped back, bumping into Zachariah, who had moved to help. "Steady there, madam," he said, his hands instinctively reaching out to steady her. She flinched at his touch, recoiling as if burned. "Please don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. Zachariah immediately dropped his hands, recognizing the fear in her voice. It was a fear he understood all too well, the kind that came from wounds that ran deeper than skin. "No harm meant," he assured her, taking a step back to give her space. She gathered her packages quickly, leaving a few coins on the counter before hurrying out the door, her skirts rustling as she disappeared into the gathering dusk. "That's Zara Sutton," the bartender explained, noting Zachariah's lingering gaze. "Came to town about 6 months ago. Keeps to herself mostly. Folks talk, of course, but she seems decent enough." Zachariah nodded, his eyes still fixed on the door. "What's her story?" the bartender shrugged. "Nobody knows for sure. Some say she was in some kind of accident. Others think it might have been deliberate. Either way, she never shows her face. Doc Hayes is the only one who's seen what's beneath that veil, and he ain't talking." Zachariah considered this information as he made his way to the local boarding house, securing a room for the night before heading to Wilson's ranch the following morning. There was something about Zara Sutton that had sparked his interest, a kindred spirit perhaps, someone else carrying the weight of a past they couldn't escape. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold as Zachariah rode out to the Wilson Ranch. The sprawling property was nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills and dotted with grazing cattle. It was peaceful, the kind of place a man could lose himself in honest work and perhaps find some measure of redemption. Old Man Wilson turned out to be a gruff but fair employer, a widower who had built his ranch from nothing and now found himself unable to manage it alone as age crept up on him. He hired Zachariah on the spot, impressed by his knowledge of cattle and his quiet, no-nonsense demeanor. "Got a small cabin by the creek you can use," Wilson said, pointing to a structure barely visible through the trees. "It ain't much, but it's private. Figure a man like you values his privacy." Zachariah nodded his thanks, appreciating the old man's perception. Privacy was indeed something he valued, along with the simplicity of ranch life. Here, a man was judged by his work and his word, not by the ghosts of his past. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm, with Zachariah rising before dawn to tend to the cattle, mending fences and breaking in young horses. The physical labor was exhausting, but it brought a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from his life for too long. At night, he would sit on the porch of his cabin, watching the stars and allowing himself to think about Zara Sutton, the veiled woman who had captured his curiosity. It was a Saturday when he saw her again, nearly 2 weeks after his arrival in Coyote Creek. He had ridden into town for supplies, the list from Wilson tucked into his pocket when he spotted her emerging from the general store, her arms laden with packages. Without thinking, he dismounted and approached her. "Need a hand with those, madam," he offered, keeping a respectful distance. She hesitated, the veil hiding her expression, but her posture tensed. "I can manage, thank you," she replied, her voice soft but firm. As if to contradict her words, one of the packages slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents onto the dusty street. Zachariah knelt to help gather the scattered items, sewing supplies, a small bottle of perfume, and various foodstuffs. "Really, it's no trouble," he insisted, placing the items back into the package. "I'm Zachariah Winters, by the way. I work at the Wilson Ranch now." She stood still, watching him through the veil. "Zara Sutton," she finally replied, though he already knew her name. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Winters, but I should be going. Let me help you home with these," he suggested, gesturing to the packages. "It's the gentlemanly thing to do." She seemed to consider his offer, her hesitation palpable. "Very well," she conceded after a moment. "I live just at the edge of town." They walked in silence, Zachariah leading Thunder by the reins with one hand while carrying most of her packages with the other. Zara walked beside him, maintaining a careful distance, her steps measured and deliberate. Her home was a small cottage surrounded by a picket fence, with a garden that showed signs of careful tending. It was modest but well kept, a haven of sorts at the edge of the frontier town. "You can leave the packages on the porch," she instructed as they approached the gate. Zachariah complied, setting them down carefully before stepping back. "It's a nice place you have here," he commented, trying to put her at ease with casual conversation. "It serves its purpose," she replied, her voice guarded. "Thank you again for your help, Mr. Winters." He tipped his hat, recognizing the dismissal. "My pleasure, Miss Sutton. Perhaps I'll see you around town." As he turned to leave, he heard her soft voice once more. "Mr. Winters." He paused, looking back at her. "Yes, madam. Why did you help me? Most people in town go out of their way to avoid me." The question caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. "I know what it's like to be the subject of whispers and stares. Sometimes a little kindness goes a long way." She stood still for a moment, as if processing his words. "Good day, Mr. Winters," she finally said, turning to unlock her door. "Good day, Miss Sutton," he replied, watching as she disappeared into the cottage, the door closing firmly behind her. The encounter, brief as it was, stayed with him as he completed his errands and rode back to the ranch. There was something about Zara Sutton that called to him, a wounded soul perhaps recognizing another. He found himself wondering what lay beneath that veil, not out of morbid curiosity, but because he sensed that whatever had marked her face had also marked her spirit, much like the scars he carried both visible and invisible. The following weeks brought more encounters, each seemingly by chance but perhaps guided by something more. He would spot her in town, offer assistance, and engage in brief conversations that gradually grew longer as her initial wariness began to fade. He learned that she had come from Boston, that she was well educated and had a passion for literature. She never spoke of what had brought her to Coyote Creek or what lay beneath her veil, and he never asked, respecting the boundaries she had established. It was during one such encounter, as they walked back to her cottage after he had helped her with her groceries, that the first real crack appeared in her carefully constructed walls. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Wonder what, Miss Sutton?" he responded, though he had an inkling of what she meant. "About what I'm hiding," she clarified, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone else does." Zachariah considered his words carefully. "I figure we all have things we hide, Miss Sutton. Some are just more visible than others." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're not like most men, Mr. Winters." "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied with a slight smile. "It was meant as one," she assured him, resuming their walk. "It's refreshing to be treated as a person rather than a curiosity." They reached her gate, and he handed over the last of her packages. "Same time next week?" he asked, having fallen into the habit of helping her with her weekly shopping. She nodded, the gesture visible despite the veil. "I would like that." As summer turned to fall, their friendship deepened. They began to share more personal stories. He told her about his time as a Texas Ranger, carefully omitting the darker chapters, and she spoke of her life in Boston, of the society she had left behind. She had a way with words that painted vivid pictures, making him see the cobblestone streets and elegant townhouses as clearly as if he had been there himself. It was during one particularly beautiful October afternoon that she invited him inside her cottage for the first time, offering him tea as thanks for fixing her leaking roof. The interior was as neat and welcoming as the exterior, with shelves lined with books and delicate touches that spoke of a refined taste. "You have quite a collection," he remarked, eyeing the books as she busied herself with the tea. "Books have always been my companions," she replied, her back to him as she arranged cups on a tray. Even more so now. He noticed that she kept her veil on, even in the privacy of her home. It was a stark reminder of the barrier that still existed between them, despite the growing closeness of their friendship. As they sat across from each other, steam rising from their cups, Zachariah found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. "You know, Zara, whatever it is you're hiding, it doesn't matter to me." She stilled, her hands tightening around her cup. "You say that now," she said quietly, "but you haven't seen what lies beneath this veil." "I've seen men torn apart by bullets and arrows," he replied gently. "I've seen the worst that people can do to each other. I doubt there's anything under that veil that would change how I see you." She was silent for a long moment. "And how do you see me, Zachariah?" It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the tea. "I see a woman of remarkable strength and grace," he answered honestly. "A woman who has faced adversity and refused to be defeated by it. A woman I've come to care for deeply." His words hung in the air between them, more revealing than he had intended. He watched as her hands trembled slightly, setting down her cup with a soft clink. "You shouldn't," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Care for me, that is. It can only lead to disappointment." Zachariah leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "Why don't you let me be the judge of that?" She stood abruptly, moving to the window, her back to him once more. "You should go," she said, her voice steadier now but still tinged with sadness. "Thank you for fixing the roof." He recognized the dismissal for what it was: fear, not rejection. Rising from his chair, he approached her slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished. When she remained still, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling her tense at his touch. "I'm not going anywhere, Zara," he promised quietly. "Not unless you truly want me to." She turned then, facing him, the veil obscuring her features but unable to hide the emotion in her voice. "What if what you see changes everything?" "It won't," he assured her, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder. With trembling fingers, she reached for the edge of her veil, hesitating for a heartbeat before slowly lifting it. Zachariah kept his eyes fixed on hers, visible now through the partially raised veil, giving her the chance to change her mind. "Don't look at me, I'm scarred," she said, her voice breaking on the last word, tears welling in the eyes that now met his. Zachariah reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her face, tracing the path of a scar that ran from her temple down her cheek to the corner of her mouth. Her skin was smooth beneath his touch, the scar a raised line that told a story of pain endured. "You're beautiful," he said simply, a smile spreading across his face. The tears that had been threatening now spilled over, trailing down her scarred cheek. "How can you say that? Look at me." "I am looking," he replied softly, "and I see beauty, courage, and strength." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "It was a fire," she whispered. "My father's house in Boston. I was trapped. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, but society had other opinions. A scarred woman has no place in Boston's elite circles." Zachariah's heart ached for the pain she had endured, both physical and emotional. "Their loss is Coyote Creek's gain," he said, his thumb gently wiping away a tear, "and mine most of all." She opened her eyes, searching his face for any sign of revulsion or pity, finding only warmth and admiration. "You truly don't mind?" In answer, he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was a brief kiss, tender and respectful, but it conveyed more than words ever could. When he pulled back, she was looking at him with wonder, as if seeing him for the first time. "You kissed me," she stated, disbelief coloring her voice. "I did," he confirmed with a smile. "And I'd like to do it again, if you'll let me." A small, hesitant smile curved her lips, transforming her face. The scar, which she had hidden for so long, did nothing to diminish her beauty in his eyes. If anything, it enhanced it, a testament to her survival. "I think I would like that," she admitted, her voice stronger now. As fall gave way to winter, their relationship blossomed. Zachariah would ride into town whenever he could spare time from his duties at the ranch, and Zara gradually began to venture out more, still wearing her veil in public, but now with Zachariah proudly by her side. The townsfolk watched this development with interest, whispers following them as they walked together through town. Some were skeptical, unable to understand what Zachariah saw in the veiled woman. Others, particularly those who had been kind to Zara during her months of isolation, were pleased to see her finding happiness. It was during a particularly harsh winter storm that their relationship deepened further. Zachariah had ridden into town despite the threatening weather, concerned about Zara's well-being. The snow had begun to fall heavily by the time he reached her cottage, the wind howling around the eaves. "You shouldn't have come," she chided as she ushered him inside, taking his snow-covered coat. "It's dangerous out there." "I couldn't stay away, knowing you were here alone," he replied, warming his hands by the fire she had built. "The pass might be blocked for days if this storm continues." She moved about the kitchen, preparing hot coffee, her veil absent in the privacy of her home. She no longer hid her face from him, though she still kept it covered when others were present. "Then you'll have to stay," she said simply, a blush coloring her cheeks at the implication. The storm raged through the night, and they sat before the fire, talking softly as the hours passed. She told him more about her life in Boston, about the fire that had claimed her parents' lives and left her scarred, about the rejection she had faced from those who had once called themselves friends. I came west seeking a fresh start, she explained, her head resting against his shoulder. I thought that in a place where no one knew me, I could begin again, but even here the scars followed me. Not just the physical ones, Zachariah observed, his arm around her. Those are the easiest to see, but the hardest to heal are the ones inside. She nodded, understanding all too well what he meant. And you, what brought you to Coyote Creek? He was silent for a long moment, considering how much to share. She had been honest with him, she deserved the same in return. I was running too, he finally admitted, from memories, from guilt. What happened? She asked gently, sensing the weight of his words. Zachariah took a deep breath, the firelight casting shadows across his face. I was a Texas Ranger for 10 years, had a partner, Daniel Weber, best friend a man could ask for. We were tracking a gang that had been terrorizing settlements along the border. Caught up to them in a small town called Redemption. He paused, the memories flooding back. It was supposed to be a simple arrest. We had them cornered in a saloon, but things went wrong. Shots were fired, and in the chaos, Daniel was hit. He died in my arms. Zara's hand found his, squeezing gently in silent support. I'm so sorry. The worst part, he continued, his voice rough with emotion, was that I couldn't be sure it wasn't my bullet that hit him. The angle, the confusion, I'll never know for certain. So you left, she surmised, understanding in her eyes. He nodded. Turned in my badge the next day and started riding. Didn't have a destination in mind, just needed to get away from the memories. Ended up here. And found me, she added softly. And found you, he agreed, turning to look at her. Maybe we were both running, but somehow we ran toward each other. The firelight danced across her face, illuminating the scar that curved down her cheek, but all Zachariah saw was the woman who had come to mean everything to him. Leaning forward, he kissed her, pouring all his feelings into the gesture. When they parted, breathless, she looked up at him with eyes that reflected his own desire. Stay with me tonight, she whispered, a question and an invitation. Are you sure? He asked, searching her face. In answer, she stood, taking his hand and leading him toward her bedroom. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the walls of the cottage, they found warmth and comfort in each other's arms. Two wounded souls finding healing in their shared love. Morning broke clear and cold, sunlight streaming through the frost-covered windows as Zachariah awakened with Zara nestled against him. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, of belonging. Watching her sleep, her scarred face relaxed in repose, he knew with certainty that he had found home. When she stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet his, a smile curved her lips. Good morning, she murmured, reaching up to touch his face. Good morning, he replied, pressing a kiss to her palm. Sleep well, she nodded, a blush coloring her cheeks as memories of the night before surfaced. Better than I have in years. They lay together in comfortable silence, the events of the previous night having shifted their relationship irrevocably. It was Zachariah who finally spoke, voicing the thoughts that had been forming in his mind for weeks. Come live with me at the ranch, he suggested, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Wilson's got a bigger cabin he's not using, said I could have it if I wanted. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with surprise. You want me to live with you? I want more than that, he admitted, his heart pounding. I want to marry you, Zara, if you'll have me. Her eyes widened, filling with tears that spilled over onto her cheeks. You want to marry me, despite. She gestured to her face. Zachariah sat up, taking her face in his hands. Not despite anything, because of everything. Because you're the bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out. She searched his face, finding only sincerity in his eyes. Yes, she whispered, her voice catching. Yes, I'll marry you. Their kiss sealed the promise, a new beginning for two people who had thought their chances at happiness were behind them. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Coyote Creek, met with a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and genuine well-wishes. Zachariah cared little for the opinions of others, focused solely on building a future with Zara. They decided on a simple ceremony in the spring, giving them time to prepare and for the harsh winter to pass. In the meantime, Zachariah worked diligently to ready the cabin Wilson had offered, making repairs and adding personal touches that he thought would please Zara. She continued to live in her cottage in town, but spent increasing amounts of time at the ranch, gradually becoming more comfortable showing her face to Wilson and the other ranch hands, who took their cues from Zachariah and treated her with respect. It was during one such visit, as they sat on the porch of what would soon be their home, that Zara broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Do you think we could invite Reverend Thomas to dinner?" she asked, her hand nestled in his. "I'd like him to get to know us before the wedding." Zachariah smiled, pleased by her growing confidence. "Of course, Wilson too, if you're comfortable with that," she nodded, a determined look in her eyes. "I need to stop hiding, Zachariah. You've shown me that. If this is to be my home, I want to be able to hold my head high, not hide behind veils and shadows." His heart swelled with pride at her courage. "You're the strongest person I know, Zara Sutton, soon to be Zara Winters." The dinner was arranged for the following week, a simple affair with Reverend Thomas, Old Man Wilson, and Doc Hayes, who had been Zara's first friend in Coyote Creek. Zara prepared the meal herself, nervous but resolute in her decision to face them without her veil. When the guests arrived, Zachariah stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, a silent show of support as she welcomed them into their home. There was a momentary awkwardness as the men saw her scarred face for the first time, but it quickly passed as conversation flowed, helped along by Zachariah's easy manner and Zara's quiet grace. By the end of the evening, as they bid their guests farewell, Zara was glowing with a newfound confidence. "That wasn't so bad," she admitted as she and Zachariah cleared the table. "They didn't stare or treat me differently." "Because they saw what I see," Zachariah replied, pulling her into his arms. "A remarkable woman who happens to have a scar. It doesn't define you, Zara." She leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest. "I'm beginning to believe that, because of you." As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, preparations for the wedding intensified. Zara threw herself into planning, determined to create a day that would celebrate not just their union, but also her emergence from the shadows of her past. The town's dressmaker, Mrs. Patterson, was commissioned to create a wedding dress, a task she approached with enthusiasm despite her initial surprise at Zara's request to design a gown without a veil. "You have such lovely eyes, dear," the older woman had commented during one fitting. "It would be a shame to hide them on your special day." Zachariah, for his part, found himself unexpectedly nervous as the day approached. Not about marrying Zara, of that he was more certain than he had been of anything in his life, but about being worthy of the trust she had placed in him. He confided these fears to Wilson during a quiet moment as they worked together mending a fence. "Son," the old rancher had said, his weathered face serious, "I've seen how that woman looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars. And I've seen how you look at her, like she's the most precious thing in the world. That's the foundation of something real, something that'll last." The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the first truly warm day of spring. Wildflowers dotted the ranch, adding splashes of color to the landscape. A simple arch had been erected near the creek, decorated with ribbons and more wildflowers, and chairs had been arranged in rows for the small gathering of guests, mostly townsfolk, who had come to know and respect the couple, along with the ranch hands who worked alongside Zachariah. Zachariah stood beneath the arch, dressed in a new suit that felt stiff and unfamiliar, his hat for once absent as he waited for his bride. Wilson stood beside him, serving as his best man, a role the old rancher had accepted with gruff emotion. A hush fell over the gathering as Zara appeared, walking slowly toward him, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Her dress was simple but elegant, the white fabric contrasting with her dark hair, which had been arranged in soft curls. But it was her face that drew all eyes uncovered, the scar visible for all to see, yet somehow diminished by the radiant joy that shone from her eyes. Zachariah felt his breath catch in his throat as she approached, overwhelmed by her beauty and her courage. When she reached him, taking his outstretched hand, he couldn't help but whisper, "You're not wearing a veil." A smile curved her lips, confident and serene. "I don't need it anymore, you've taught me that." Reverend Thomas began the ceremony, his words washing over them as they stood hand in hand, eyes locked on each other. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with a depth of feeling that moved many in the audience to tears. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared, beaming at the couple. "Zachariah, you may kiss your bride." With tender reverence, Zachariah cupped Zara's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheeks, scars and all, before leaning in to seal their union with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and acceptance. The celebration that followed was joyous, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Zachariah watched his wife. As she moved among their guests, her head held high, accepting congratulations and well wishes with grace. The people of Coyote Creek saw her now as he had always seen her, not as the veiled woman shrouded in mystery and rumor, but as Zara Winters, a woman of strength and beauty who had found her place in their community. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Zachariah found Zara standing alone by the creek, gazing out at the water. Having second thoughts, he teased, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, her hands covering his. "Never." Just taking it all in. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be standing here, married to a handsome cowboy, surrounded by friends. "Life has a way of surprising us," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes in the best possible ways." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "Thank you for seeing past the scars." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, his voice husky with emotion, "for trusting me enough to show me who you really are." They stood together as twilight deepened into night, the sounds of celebration fading behind them, the future stretching out before them like the vast western sky, boundless and full of promise. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of happiness and adjustment. They settled into the cabin on the Wilson Ranch, making it truly their home with touches both practical and personal. Zara planted a garden, cultivating not just vegetables, but also flowers that reminded her of her mother's garden in Boston. Zachariah continued his work on the ranch, finding satisfaction in the honest labor, and in coming home each evening to Zara's welcoming arms. As Zara became more comfortable in her new role, she began to venture more frequently into town, no longer hiding behind veils but facing the world with quiet dignity. There were still those who stared, particularly strangers passing through, but the people of Coyote Creek had come to accept her as one of their own, her scarred face now simply another familiar feature in their small community. She found purpose beyond her marriage as well, offering reading lessons to children at the small schoolhouse and occasionally assisting Doc Hayes with patients, having revealed a knowledge of basic medicine learned from books during her isolated months in town. These activities brought her a sense of fulfillment that further bolstered her confidence. Their happiness seemed complete, but as their first anniversary approached, Zara began to experience a fatigue that she initially attributed to the increasingly warm days. When the fatigue was joined by morning sickness, however, she realized with a mixture of joy and trepidation that she was with child. She kept the discovery to herself for several days, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Zachariah. When she finally told him, on a quiet evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "We're having a baby," she nodded, tears of happiness shimmering in her eyes. "Doc Hayes confirmed it yesterday. He thinks it will be a winter baby, perhaps around Christmas. Zachariah pulled her into his arms, his joy evident in the way he held her, as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "Our family." As her body changed with the growing life within, Zara found herself contemplating what their child would inherit from them, her intelligence and love of books, perhaps, or Zachariah's strength and sense of justice. But there was also the fear, which she confided to him during a particularly vulnerable moment, that the baby might inherit her scars in some way. Not the physical ones, she clarified, lying beside him in their bed, his hand resting protectively on her swelling belly. "But the fear, the shame I carried for so long, I don't want our child to ever feel the need to hide." Zachariah's response was immediate and resolute. "Our child will know only love and acceptance, Zara, from us, from this community. The world can be cruel, yes, but it can also be kind. We'll teach them to face life with the same courage you've shown." His words reassured her, and as the pregnancy progressed, she focused on the joy of impending motherhood rather than the fears that occasionally surfaced. The women of Coyote Creek, particularly Mrs. Patterson and the wives of several ranch hands, rallied around her, sharing advice and helping prepare for the baby's arrival. Old man Wilson, who had become something of a surrogate father to both of them, took particular delight in the prospect of a child on his ranch. "Been too long since we had little feet running around here," he declared, presenting them with a cradle he had crafted himself, the wood smooth and gleaming from hours of careful work. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Zara's due date drew nearer. Zachariah found himself increasingly protective, reluctant to leave her alone for long periods. Wilson, understanding his concern, adjusted his duties to keep him closer to home, a gesture that both appreciated deeply. It was during a crisp November evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, that Zara went into labor. Zachariah, despite having faced armed outlaws without flinching, found himself nearly paralyzed with fear as he sent one of the ranch hands galloping toward town to fetch Doc Hayes. The labor was long and difficult, with Zara's strength tested to its limits. Zachariah remained by her side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow and murmuring words of encouragement even as his own heart raced with anxiety. As dawn broke on the following day, their daughter made her entrance into the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin, and her parents' hearts with indescribable joy. Doc Hayes placed the tiny, red-faced infant in Zara's arms, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she gazed down at the perfect little features. "She's beautiful," Zachariah whispered, awe evident in his voice as he gently touched the baby's downy head. "Just like her mother." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she looked from her daughter to her husband. "We did it," she said softly. "We created this miracle." They named her Eliza Grace Winters, honoring both Zara's mother, Elizabeth, and the grace that had brought them together against all odds. Eliza thrived under the loving attention of her parents and the extended family they had found in Coyote Creek. She had Zachariah's blue eyes and Zara's dark hair, a combination that made her the object of admiration whenever they took her into town. As Eliza grew from infant to toddler, curious about everything and fiercely independent, Zachariah found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a solitary, guilt-ridden former Texas Ranger to a husband and father, rooted in a community that had become home. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for, a second chance at life and love that he cherished daily. Zara, too, marveled at the transformation in her life. The scars that had once defined her existence had become merely a part of her story, not its entirety. She still bore them, both physical and emotional, but they no longer dictated how she lived or how she saw herself. On Eliza's third birthday, as they hosted a small celebration at the ranch with their closest friends, Zachariah found Zara standing at the edge of the gathering. watching their daughter charming Wilson with her recently acquired ability to recite the alphabet. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand beside her. A smile curved her lips as she leaned against him. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, about that day in the saloon when we first met. If someone had told me then that this would be my life now." "Would you have believed them?" he asked, his arm encircling her waist. She shook her head. "Not for a second. I was so certain that no one could ever see past." She gestured to her face, the scar a silvery line now, faded with time but still visible. "And I was just as certain that I didn't deserve happiness after what happened with Daniel," he admitted. "We were both wrong. Thankfully," she agreed, turning to face him fully. "I have something to tell you," she added, a hint of excitement in her voice. He raised an eyebrow, recognizing the look in her eyes. "Another surprise," she nodded, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "Eliza's going to be a big sister. Doc Hayes confirmed it yesterday." Joy flooded through him and he pulled her into his arms, mindful of the watching eyes but unable to contain his happiness. "You continue to make me the luckiest man alive, Zara Winters. And you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him, "continue to make me the happiest woman, scars and all." As they rejoined the celebration, Zachariah reflected on the twist of fate that had brought him to Coyote Creek, to the veiled woman who had captured his heart, and to the life they had built together. It was a reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the greatest healing, and that love, true love, sees beyond the surface to the beauty that lies within. Eliza, noticing her parents' return, broke away from Wilson and ran to them, her small arms outstretched. Zachariah scooped her up, holding her between them as Zara smoothed back their daughter's dark curls. "Tell Daddy what you learned today," Zara encouraged, her eyes shining with maternal pride. "The alphabet," Eliza declared, proceeding to demonstrate her newfound knowledge with enthusiasm if not perfect accuracy. Zachariah listened, his heart full to bursting with love for this little family. They had created a family that would soon grow by one more. As he caught Zara's eye over their daughter's head, he saw in her gaze the same contentment, the same sense of rightness that he felt. They had both been running when they found each other, she from a world that could not see past her scars, he from a guilt that threatened to consume him. Instead, they had found healing, acceptance, and a love that continued to deepen with each passing day. The sun began to set over the Wilson ranch, casting long shadows across the land that had become their home. As their friends departed and the excitement of the day began to wane, Zachariah, Zara, and Eliza stood on the porch of their cabin, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Zara instructed their daughter, pointing to a particularly bright star. Eliza closed her eyes tightly, her little face scrunched in concentration. "I wish for a pony," she announced after a moment, opening her eyes and looking expectantly at her father. Zachariah laughed, exchanging an amused glance with Zara. "We'll see about that," he hedged, knowing full well that Wilson had already set aside a gentle mare's foal for Eliza's next birthday. "What did you wish for, Mama?" Eliza asked, turning her attention to Zara. Zara smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach where their second child grew. "I already have everything I could wish for," she replied, her eyes meeting Zachariah's over their daughter's head. "A home, a family, and love, what more could anyone want?" As the stars multiplied in the vast western sky, Zachariah silently agreed. From the moment he had touched Zara's scarred face and smiled, recognizing the beauty that lay beneath, to this peaceful evening surrounded by the family they had created, their journey had been one of healing and hope. The scars they both carried, hers visible, his hidden, had brought them together. Two wounded souls finding in each other the acceptance and love they had thought forever beyond their reach. And as Eliza began to yawn, her excitement giving way to the natural fatigue of a 3-year-old who had experienced a day full of celebration, Zachariah gathered his family close. grateful beyond words for the second chance at happiness that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a dusty frontier town. "Time for bed, little one," he murmured, lifting Eliza into his arms. "Tomorrow's another day." Together, the three of them, soon to be four, made their way inside, closing the door on the vast, star-filled sky, but carrying its infinite promise within their hearts. For in finding each other, Zachariah and Zara had discovered that true beauty lies not in unblemished perfection, but in the courage to love and be loved, scars and all, in a world that too often values only what can be seen on the surface. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and changed, as Coyote Creek evolved from frontier town to established community, as they faced challenges and celebrated triumphs, that fundamental truth remained their guiding star, that love, real love, sees beyond the scars to the heart that beats beneath, recognizing in another soul the perfect complement to one's own.